Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. I hope you are having fun with what's going on in the world right now. I hope you are not plagued by boredom. Oh, that's a clever joke right there. We are here today to talk about the top 10, and actually technically top 11 plagues of Magic the Gathering. To make sure we're all on the same page, because I know people like to share their input, we are not going to be talking about cards that are around the plague, things like Plague Spitter, stuff like that. We're specifically going to be talking about the plagues of Magic. And there are only 11, so while I had initially intended to just do the top 10, with one extra, it seemed kind of ridiculous to not include it, and considering the fact that a lot of people have extra time kicking around, having an extra card to hear and talk about is probably worthwhile. So let's start out by diving in with number 11, and that is Desecration Plague. So this is a sorcery that costs 1 green and 3. It says destroy target enchantment or land. This is from Journey into Nyx. So this was the first Theros block. The flavor text says, the gods think of us as insects. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. And that's Parasophia, the philosopher. So what's going on in the artwork? We can see that this is the equivalent of a plague of locusts. You can see them actually, what appears to be them, stripping the land of all the greenery. At first, it may look like the focus of this artwork is some kind of like big, weird stone monument in the back. But when you actually pay attention to the artwork, you can see on the left-hand side, there are a number of these gigantic insects with long segmented bodies. In all honesty, these things look like they would be bigger than the size of your hand. So you have these like weird elongated orange bodies with gigantic like dragonfly style wings. You can see if you start on the left hand side of the artwork compared to the right hand side, that all of the greenery, all of the life essentially is being stripped away. Now this may be some sort of shrine to Karamitra, which is why it's considered a desecration. And that would make sense considering that Karamitra is like the god of harvests and growth. But you can totally see the absolute barren nature of the stone on the one side. Even the trees are being nibbled down to nothingness. You can see just kind of like the trunks left over, but all the greenery is being eaten away. Now, as far as plagues go in Magic the Gathering, this is a pretty light one, which is why it's being listed here at number 11. I tried to do these in a roughly reasonable order. I imagine that for different people, you're going to have a different ordering of these in terms of what will be the top. So feel free to share in the comments what you would order them as. I tried to pick the ones that felt, I should say, less impactful overall comparatively, right? Obviously, having all of your all of the arable land stripped away if you were a farm or something like that, that would be devastating. But we're going to be talking about plagues that cause far more devastation than that. Moving on to number 10, we have Crovican Plague. This is a throwback all the way to Alliances. This is old school. So, 1 black and 2. It's an enchant creature. Play on a non-wall creature you control. I do like that they specify non-wall creature because, I mean, really, if you think about it, a wall getting the plague is a ridiculous concept, right? A wall of stone or ice, if it's a wall made of living things, sure. You know, you got a wall of beetles or something, maybe. But most walls are like wall of stone or wall of ice, so it doesn't make sense for a plague to have anything to do with that. So, Crovican Plague, play only on a non-wall creature you control, 1 black and 2. Draw a card at the beginning of the upkeep of the turn after Crovican Plague comes into play. So this is one of those old school, they call cards where you draw an extra card when you play it like cantrips, but this is more like a slow trip because you don't get the card until the turn afterwards. 0 mana, tap enchanted creature to have Crovican Plague deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Put a -0/-1 counter on enchanted creature. So, the concept behind this essentially, and this is a very evil thing to do, like this definitely has a very black feel. You take one of your own creatures and infect it with something, and then it goes around spreading that. And I like the fact that it represents the wasting away of both, not only the creatures that you're going and infecting, as well as the original subject, right? The -1 toughness counter that goes on the creature each time you activate it shows that the plague is eating away at the insides of this individual. And the artwork is actually really evocative. You can see this individual afflicted by the plague. This would be the one who was actually selected by the enchanting wizard. You can see him just kind of down on his hands and knees, kind of the way you look if you've gone on a big drinking bender and you're over the toilet. They're like, oh God, make it stop. But his robes and finery are all destroyed and disheveled. Now they're just kind of tattered scraps hanging off him. But there's enough there to show you how things were at one point, right? He was probably finely dressed, some kind of bureaucrat or aristocrat, and here he is now just struggling to survive as he gets weaker and weaker and leads to the loss of more life. You can actually see in the background, there's somebody else who has been stricken by this plague, and overall, the city here has a feeling of desolation and emptiness, and there's a dirtiness to the ground, and the wall behind him is stained. It gives a feeling of just the unclean. This is very evocative, but it is low ranking on the scale simply because it doesn't affect very much. This isn't something that's going to get to spread very far because you can only do a little bit with it before the plague bearer's existence is snuffed out by it. So this falls on the weaker end of the scale and is at number 10. Number 9 is going to be Swallowing Plague. This one, again, a low-ranking one, and we will get into the reasons for that. That's 2 black and X. It is an arcane sorcery. For those of you who don't know what arcane is, it is a subtype created during the Kamigawa block, and this card's from Champions of Kamigawa. And the idea behind arcane is there were certain cards that would either trigger on you playing arcane spells, or there was a way to kind of meld arcane spells together where you could cast an arcane spell and then add additional effects from other arcane spells onto it. Now, Swallowing Plague itself doesn't have any of these additional abilities. It's not a card you can attach to other ones, but it can have other things attached to it. So, Swallowing Plague is 2 black and X, and it deals X damage to target creature, and you gain X life. So it is similar to a creature-only drain life, but you're not required to only use black mana. The flavor text says, we are recalling all forces from the Takanuma Swamp. We lose men daily to kami attacks, and it seems our defeats only encourage them further. And that is in a letter from General Takano to Lord Konda. Lord Konda was actually the cause of the kami unrest. It's a very interesting story from the Kamigawa block that I really dug. But you can see here what looks like a bunch of little flying beetle insects that are heading in here. And these are all tiny little kami that are attacking this poor traveler who looks like he is just outside of some fortification. And it looks like they might have even been closing the gates to leave him to his fate. And can we take a moment to appreciate his absolutely ridiculous MC hammer pants? You can't, the plague is saying, oh, we can touch this. That's an MC Hammer joke for all you old folk out there. Let me know if you got it in the comments. And we shall move on to card number 8. This one's obviously Swallowing Plague, if I didn't mention it, is low ranking because it only destroys 1 creature. So this is not something that spreads and causes a lot of issue. Card number 8, Undercity Plague. 2 black and 4. For this sorcery from Gatecrash, so that's the second Ravnica block. Sorcery that does target player loses 1 life, discards a card, then sacrifices a permanent. And it has Cipher. So basically you can exile the spell on a creature. Once you cast it, you exile the spell encoded on a creature. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you can cast this spell again. So it's interesting in that this is a plague that you infuse into your own creatures, but it actually doesn't have any effect on the host, but it will have a detrimental effect, obviously, on whoever is being bitten or attacked by the host. And you can see in the artwork here, we have some sort of, most likely an elf from the ear types there. I mean, if you look at the ear type, it's pointed. If you look at the shoulder armor and the little, like armband, vambrace, whatever you want to call it. These both have Celestian iconography. Now, granted, it is kind of dark, but I think that's the point. This is an elf that has traveled maybe as an emissary from Celestia into the Undercity to deal with either the Dimir or the Golgari, and has contracted the plague. I'm guessing this would represent the sacrificing a permanent aspect of the card when you get hit, as one of your creatures gets infused. And you can see how rough the plague is, because normally elves are quite healthy looking, and this elf looks more like a troll orc demon almost, with gray emaciated skin. And I like the fact that you just have like this darkness, and even the light that's coming in is this kind of unhealthy blue. Overall, a very cool card. Oh, it is a Dimir oriented card. You can actually see the Dimir water stamp on the back. So this would be the Dimir infecting a elf that has probably stumbled on something the Dimir is doing in secret, because they are the Guild of Secrets and Subterfuge. Not too shabby as a plague, but overall, like, if you destroy the carrier of it, all of a sudden that plague stops. So this is another reason this is not a super high ranking plague, right? That's why this one's coming in at what did I say? Is this number 7? Is this number 7? How many plagues do we have left? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is, I guess, is number 8. Okay, so number 7 is the Endemic Plague. 1 black and 3 for this sorcery from Onslaught. As an additional cost to play Endemic Plague, sacrifice a creature. Destroy all creatures that share a creature type with the sacrificed creature. They can't be regenerated. And this is another one of those, like the Krovikan Plague, this is another one of those awful, evil black magics where you literally take somebody and infuse them with the plague, and they take it and spread it. So in the artwork, you can see this dude who has been infected with this plague, and he's like, basically, it's like it's flowing forth out of him as this noxious vapor. His eyes are kind of like squunched up and half rolled back as he reaches up towards his mouth, as this vile plague energy and essence just leaks, just pretty much gets belched forth out of his mouth. And you can see it is making a beeline directly towards this other dude. And they made them look almost like identical twins in terms of the flavor concept and making sure that it's obvious that you're destroying creatures that are the exact same type. I mean, these two guys could be twins or brothers. So you can see the noxious vapors of this plague making their way directly to this guy. And while they haven't even reached him yet, you can see him, he's either already stricken by it from the fact that he has his hand up towards his throat and his other hand kind of in a claw motion, similar to the guy who is already being ended by this plague. So it's a situation where either he is currently inhaling it, or he is taken aback at what's happened to his comrade in arms while also being concerned about his own future. Honestly, the darkness of this is intense. The idea of wiping out all of your own kind is very, very intense, right? I mean, part of the point of being any species, at least in the normal biological world, is to further your species. So anything that's a threat to your species particular, as opposed to everything overall, is very impactful. And that's the reason that this one ranks higher, even though it is just a sorcery that goes off as a one-time deal instead of repeating over and over with an enchantment style effect, right? It does genuinely make a difference for my ranking system, but a pretty solid card. Moving on to the next plague that we're dealing with, that would be the Engineered Plague. Now, this is originally from Urza's Legacy, 1 black and 2. When Engineered Plague comes into play, choose a creature type. All creatures of the chosen type get -1/-1. And the flavor text says, the admixture of Bitterwort in the viral brew has produced most favorable results. And this is Phyrexian progress notes. The Phyrexians are just awful, awful individuals, right? That's, as a group, they're terrible. Now, the artwork actually shows the way that this plague works quite effectively. I like it. The artwork shows a Viashino, and he is chained up with multiple goblins tied and chained to him. In the background, you can see all this black miasma, which presumably is actually the plague being administered to these test subjects. They are trapped in a Phyrexian facility being experimented on. But you can see clearly that the fact that it's engineered here specifically to destroy goblins. And these are hardier goblins than normal, I would say, because goblins a lot of the time only have 1 toughness, and these goblins are still alive. But you can see the Viashino, and while he's clearly not pleased to be captured in this way, the goblins that are around him have big red puffy eyes, big red puffy nose, like running nose, very sickly looking. You even have the one drooping ear on the goblin on the right-hand side, showing that indeed this is an effective plague specifically targeted towards goblins. So the flavor level on this is awesome, and while it is only -1/-1, because it affects an entire creature type and is a permanent enchantment, that is why it ranks higher for me on the scale of awfulness, because that's how I'm ranking them. For the top 10, the most awful plagues are at the top, right? So moving on to the next plague that we have here, and this is plague number 5. I imagine this video is probably gonna run into some issues because of how much I've said that word, but we shall see. Let's see how it goes. 1 black and 2, same casting cost as the one we just looked at, Virulent Plague. And this one is interesting. I almost ranked it lower. Like for me, Engineered Plague and this one come close because they're both specifically keyed to certain things. So this one gives creature tokens -2/-2, and it was the -2/-2 and the fact that it blankets across all token creatures that made me elect to put this one higher in the ranking. The flavor text says, this pestilence robs us of glorious death in battle. We starve to death with full bellies, and we drown trying to slake our unnatural thirst. That is some intense flavor text. We starve to death with full bellies and drown trying to slake our unnatural thirst. That's absolutely amazing. And you can see in the artwork, multiple people who have been laid low. They're at differing stages. The more you go in the background, the lower to the ground they get and the less healthy they are. Up in the front, you can see an orc who has been inflicted with this. And overall, it's very, very intense and flavorful. It's not more higher ranking because it specifically only affects creature tokens. Now we're moving on into the top 4 where things get more dangerous. All right, so number 4 is Dakmor Plague. This is actually from Portal 2nd Age, if you're not familiar with that expansion symbol. The Portal sets were like the beginner sets of Magic. That's actually where they came up with the concept of just putting a mana symbol on the basic lands instead of the tap symbol and everything like that. But other than that, admittedly, the Portal sets didn't have much of an impact on Magic the Gathering. So this is 2 black and 3. It is a sorcery. Dakmor Plague deals 3 damage to each creature and player. And I love how, because it's a beginner set, there's actually reminder text that says, this includes your creatures and you. And the flavor text says, the tiniest cough can be deadlier than the fiercest dragon. And everybody knows how that is right now. You know, if you're out in public and you hear somebody cough, your neck's whipping around. What are you doing out here? Put a bag over your head. So Dakmor Plague, it's pretty straightforward artwork. You can see a bunch of people being affected by the plague here. And you can actually see in the background what looks like the wizard who's casting it. He's got his hand kind of reached up in a claw with magical energy flowing around it. Maybe he's angry because they made fun of his goofy hat. And they're like, I'll teach you. So in the front, you've got an elf that's just grabbing up at its throat and leaning forwards. You've got some soldiers in the background, and you even have a goblin facing in the other direction. Now, this one is just a one-shot use. It isn't an enchantment that sticks around. However, the fact that it hits all creatures and every player makes it feel more widespread, which is the reason that it actually got all the way up to 4th in my ranking. I mean, again, I said, if you have a different ranking, share it in the comments below, because I know people are going to go, I don't feel that way about this. I feel like as we move up into the last 3, you'll probably be more likely to agree with these as the highest ranking plague. So let's move into 3 and see what it be. All right, that's the English of today. So that's Traveling Plague. 2 black and 3 for this enchant creature from the Odyssey block. And the card says, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, put a plague counter on Traveling Plague. Enchanted creature gets -1/-1 for each plague counter on Traveling Plague. Is it just me, or do the minuses in front of the -1, like, do the minuses seem really, really low? Like, normally aren't they higher on the cards? Hold on here. I'm going to take a quick peek backwards and look at a couple of the other cards with minuses. Engineered Plague, Virulent Plague. Yeah, it really does visually appear like the minuses are just typeset a little bit lower on this. That's odd. So anyways, enchanted creature gets -1/-1 for each plague counter on Traveling Plague. When enchanted creature leaves play, that creature's controller returns Traveling Plague from its owner's graveyard to play. So basically, you put this on a creature, and every single turn, it doesn't matter whose turn it is. At the beginning of every upkeep that happens, another counter goes on this Traveling Plague. So the creature is going to be wasting away more and more as turns go by. But where it gets really gross is once the creature leaves play, then that creature's controller returns Traveling Plague to play. So this is going to go around and eat creature after creature after creature until no one is left. This is not survivable. There is no way for the creatures to survive this. I mean, aside from some sort of magical protections. Like, this will wipe out all life forms. And you can see in the artwork, you've got two individuals who are both afflicted wandering through this desert. And the desert gives this sort of like bleak inevitability to it. If you look at the guy who's walking in front, his clothes are all beat up. His face is all pockmarked and diseased looking, like he looks really, really hurting. And you're out here in the middle of a desert, which gives you the feeling that there is no help coming. Things will not get better for these people. And this plague will continue to spread regardless. It has such a feeling of inevitability to it. And I very much enjoy that conceptually, as it makes it feel darker and scarier. The number 2 slot is going to be a similar concept. We've got Necrotic Plague. This is 2 black and 2 for another enchant creature. Enchanted creature has, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard, its controller chooses target creature one of his or her opponent's controls. Return Necrotic Plague from its owner's graveyard to the battlefield attached to that creature. And this is actually from the 2011 core set. Now, this one in some ways is scarier and less scary than the Traveling Plague. I had a hard time actually really with the top 3 deciding exactly who should be number 1, 2, and 3. Because on one hand, the Traveling Plague will come back and it can just wipe out your opponents. Like, if I play a Traveling Plague on one of your creatures and your creature goes, you can then put it out and put it on one of my creatures. But if you're the only one with creatures, you have to put it on another one of your creatures. With Necrotic Plague, it's going to go back and forth, right? Where it's going to be on one of your creatures, then one of my creatures. Because it says when you basically, the controller of the creature that goes to the graveyard is the one who decides the creature, and it has to be one that their opponent controls. So with that restriction, the Necrotic Plague is a little more fair and balanced in terms of who it takes out. The artwork is pretty rough. You can see this horse, and it's all plague-ridden. Its body looks all emaciated, and it actually looks like there are a bunch of flies flying around it. Just the concept of being so weakened by something that you can't even bat away flies that have come to feast on you is just so depressing and despondency creating. It creates this feeling of despondency. And you can see there are a whole bunch of other horses that have already succumbed to this. So it's like you're already rotting from the inside. It's necrosis. And it's just so dark. Like, there's just something so bleak about this as well. You've got the dark clouds in the background. You've got these horses. Who's going to save them? Like, there's nobody to save these horses. Unlike the traveling individuals out in the desert, these are wild animals with zero chance of survival. And this plague will just continue onwards. So this and the Traveling Plague do feel fairly close in rankings, but ultimately, because you have to sacrifice the creature outright instead of a slow build, like, basically this is like you get it and your life ends quickly. The Traveling Plague, depending on how hardy you are, could exist for a serious amount of time. So this one gets ranked number 2. And number 1, to me, the darkest and most awful plague in all of Magic the Gathering is Spreading Plague. This one's from Invasion. It's 1 black and 4. And it says, whenever a creature comes into play, destroy all other creatures that share a color with it. They can't be regenerated. And the flavor text says, the cruelest strain of plague keeps its host alive long enough to return home and infect their families. And you can see in the artwork, you have all of these individuals succumbing to the plague. You have soldiers and angels. Like, these are literally angels, beings of light and goodness, plummeting from the sky as a plague snuffs their life out. And the idea that, like, this is just something that keeps happening. So no matter what, as you bring out new creatures, you bring out a blue creature, all of your blue creatures except that one creature get wiped out. So this is a plague that sticks around permanently. It's never going anywhere, right? The previous ones we looked at were enchant creatures. This is an enchantment that sticks out. It affects everybody. It doesn't matter who's playing, doesn't matter what deck you are, what color you are. This affects everybody across the board. And it's this perpetual cycle of death and loneliness. So you have somebody who's responsible for bringing the plague and wiping out everyone, but at the same time, they survive until somebody else comes along and then they get wiped out by the plague. But that new person is always left in isolation afterwards. Everybody's gone. That just creates such a crazy sense of isolation and sadness and guilt. It would drive you insane. And this pattern would happen over and over and over. People could be leaving diaries talking about what happened. They're all gone. I don't know what happened, but I'm still here. And then that person's gone. And it's just this crazy sort of endless scenario, which makes it way more terrifying. And the artwork with the angels plummeting out of the sky with the black swirling plague in the back is just so absolutely intense that for me, this is the number one, because it's just everybody is just going to end up alone or dead. And that is so bleak. So, my friends, that ends the top 10, technically top 11 plagues of Magic the Gathering. I am very interested to know how you would rank them. So let me know about that in the comments below. Also, let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video, because normally when I do top videos, they tend to just be top most valuable from particular sets as an aid for people who are new to the game. But if you enjoyed this and would like to see more of these sort of flavor journeys, because that's what this is, right? It's a big old flavor journey. If you like this and want to see more of it, hit the video with the thumbs up, leave a comment, share it around, let me know that the video is a good one, because then we can do more stuff like this. And if it turns out it's not for you, also let me know, because that's useful information. So a big shout out to all my patrons and channel members for supporting what I do here. It does make a big difference for me and the channel. Everybody else, I also appreciate you being here. It is nice to have people enjoy what I'm doing. Thanks for coming by. I will see all of you lovely people very soon.